Hi, good morning. My name is Emer Hurley and I'm the Festival Director of West Cork Literary Festival. Thank you so much for joining us online this morning. I'm down here in Bantry where the weather is absolutely beautiful, and I'm joined by Canadian writer Mary Lawson, who is in the UK, and West Cork journalist Nadine O'Regan, who is in Dublin. So we're coming to you from all over. And it's lovely to be back in person in Bantry, but also to still be able to present some online events where people can join the festival from wherever they are. So I'm just going to introduce you to Nadine and then hand over to her, and she will introduce you to Mary. So Nadine O'Regan is an award-winning journalist, broadcaster and podcaster. She's the editor of the Business Post magazine, the culture magazine that's published weekly with the Business Post. She's also a columnist, arts writer, and the head of podcasting with the Sunday newspaper. A cover presenter on RTE Radio's Late Date, Nadine has presented long-running shows on Dublin stations Phantom FM and TX FM and national station Today FM. She also hosts the podcast My Roots Are Showing. As I said, Nadine is originally from West Cork and she's now living in Dublin. And I'm going to hand you over to Nadine and Mary now, and I hope you all enjoy the event.
Emer, thank you so much. I have brought my West Cork mug here, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Mary Lawson to this event as part of the West Cork Literary Festival. I've been to the festival myself so many times and just loved it. It's a fantastic, fantastic festival. And even if I can't be there in person today, it's absolutely brilliant to be included in this format in these late pandemic times, to still be able to talk about literature and be involved, and with such a great author, Mary Lawson. Welcome to the West Cork Literary Festival. And I suppose, I'd love to talk about your latest book, A Town Called Solace, Booker Prize nominated. But I also want to chat as well about the earlier part of your career. You are, of course, the author of 3 other novels, Crow Lake, The Other Side of the Bridge, Road Ends, and you have won awards, been featured on major talk shows, had your work translated into multiple languages, and you have fans across the globe. You have a very interesting trajectory in that, although you are a proud Canadian and you write about Ontario and your work is so steeped in that particular world and that kind of history, you actually relocated to England in the 1960s. So to some extent, this is a world formed from your imagination from a very young point. And that's one element to your career that I find fascinating. And by the way, I have caught the earrings, the maple leaf. Amazing. I have the mug, you have the earrings. But I suppose I also wanted to find out a little bit about your trajectory, because unlike most novelists, starting off, maybe scrabbling around in the margins of the day, trying to find time to write between day jobs, you actually started writing a little bit later than other people, in your 30s. And it was actually when you were, I think I'm correct in saying 55, that your first novel was published after many kind of fits and starts and rejection slips. So your road was arduous and difficult, and then the book was so extraordinarily successful. And actually it was amazing to me to walk down to my local shop in Rathmines and be able to walk over to, it's a tiny bookshop down there in Debray Books. Well, it's small enough, and still on sale is a copy of Crow Lake, and that's 20 years on. That's an enduring classic at this point. So maybe to start, could you take us back to those arduous, difficult times when you were writing and getting nowhere?
Yes, I could. And thanks to your little bookstore. That's so lovely to hear that Crow Lake is still there. Yes. First thing to say is that nothing was planned or deliberate. I came over here for a holiday when I finished university and ran out of money and had to get a job, and discovered that I could get a very good job over here, a better job here than at home. And while I was working, I met a guy. These things happen when you're 22. Now that was in 1968. That was a long time ago. And I worked for some years. I had not studied English at university because books were my escape. They were my passion and my joy, and I didn't want them to be turned into work. I didn't want to study them and so forth. I studied psychology instead. And in Canada at that stage, you needed a PhD to practice as a psychologist. But over here, you could get a job with just a first degree. So it was a sensible thing to do, to stay and do that. It was when my kids were born and started school that I thought I need to earn some money. And it isn't really possible to work part-time back then, certainly not in my field. So I started trying to write, and I wrote short stories for a while, but I discovered that it wasn't my thing, really. I wanted to develop relationships and character over time. And unless you're Alice Munro, that requires a book. So I started trying to teach myself to write. And that's where the drawback of not having studied English comes in, because I had never analyzed how books are made up, how you create tension, how you structure a novel, all this stuff. And I'm a very slow learner, and it took me years and years and years. And Crow Lake, my goodness, when that was finished, I started sending it out, and it was turned down for 4 straight years by every literary agency in the Writers and Artists Yearbook. Practically, it was just, and they all said the same thing. They said that it was very well written and very evocative of time and place, but in the present commercial climate, no publisher would touch it. And then 3 literary agencies at once asked to see me, and I chose one, and within 2 weeks there was a bidding war from 7 British publishers, which just goes to show you that nobody knows what makes a good book, far less what will sell. Literary agents only earn money if they sell your book. You don't pay them anything, they just take a percentage. And therefore, they will not turn down a book that they think will sell. That's their bread and butter. And therefore, they're not being mean when they say it's not publishable. They think that's true. And if people keep telling you year after year, rejection slip after rejection slip, that it isn't publishable, it is extraordinarily hard to carry on sending it out. And I wouldn't have been able to continue, I don't think, just emotionally, mentally, had it not been that my family, both sides of the Atlantic, seemed to think that that's what I should do, that it was perfectly sensible to spend your whole life writing things that you therefore must just put in a wastepaper basket because nobody wants to read them. They seemed to think that was quite legitimate. And I was in the very fortunate position that my husband earned enough that I didn't have to earn. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it. I couldn't have made it because I'm slow, and it took me a long time to finally get there. But when it took off, it really took off, and I was completely baffled because it's a story about a small farming community in northern Canada. Why is that going to sell in, China? It seems amazing, but that's how it is. I guess the other thing is it's about family, and everybody everywhere has family.
And the local is universal, as we've
seen.
The
local is universal.
So many great writers. I wonder, there was a turning point, I think, for you when an editor read a story that you had set in Canada.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think sometimes when people are starting out, they have to write a lot to figure out where the rich seam is in their writing.
You're absolutely right. At the time, I was writing short stories for women's magazines because although you can get short stories published in very reputable literary magazines, they don't pay. The only place that will take an unknown writer and pay them money is women's magazines. So that's what I was writing for. And they have very strict requirements. They want you to write a contemporary story about here and now, in my case, the UK. And you have to have a male and female character and all this sort of stuff, which I wasn't interested in writing. But on the other hand, I thought, well, put your mind to it. If you can earn money this way, then it's a good way of learning. So I did that for some time. And then, as I said, I thought, nah, I want to try and write a book. I wrote a book. It took me 5 years. And at the end of that time, it wasn't any good. So rather bitterly, I went back to short stories. But when I went back, I thought, there's a story I want to write that is based on my own family history. And it belongs in Canada. It's an extremely Canadian story. So no magazine is going to publish it. But I'm going to write it anyway, just for me. So I did. Set it in a small farming community because I come from one and I hate doing research. So that seemed a sensible thing to do. I had it set in my own time. There was a little girl called Kate in it. I had her born in 1946 because I was, and I know what it was like back then, you know. So I wrote it and I absolutely loved writing it. I think because I knew exactly how it would be. It was complete fiction, although the idea was triggered by my own family history. But I knew that if it had happened, it would have been like that. Because I know how small communities work. I know the rules they live their lives by and the things that matter to them and what they talk about and how they talk. All of that was in me at a depth that the present never is. I think what you take in your childhood really goes in there at a fundamental level. Mm-hmm. And when I finished it, I thought, well, nobody's going to want it, but it is the best thing I've done. So I sent it to the fiction editor of the magazine that had published most of my work. And she phoned me and she said, Mary, you know, this is not our sort of thing, but I'm going to publish it anyway because I love it. And also, you've got a novel here and you should write that. And you must set it in Canada. Your writing goes up a level when you write about your home. Mm. And that was it. What she was actually saying was that I had found my voice, and my voice had a Canadian accent. Mm. And it was a wonderful thing that she did, really, because she gave me permission to do what I really wanted to do. The downside of that is if you write exactly what you want to write, you can't necessarily expect anybody else to want to read it. And I did know that it was not going to be easy to get published. I didn't know how hard, but I knew. Now that little short story became Crow Lake. Well, it took me a long time to transform it. Another 5 years. Well, basically 4 years. I wrote it and gave it to my husband to read. And he said that he thought it was good. And I thought, well, yes, he's my husband. He would say that. Who can I trust? Who would be brave enough to be honest with me? Whose opinion I value? And I thought of my younger sister, who reads the same sort of thing that I do. And I said to her, would you read this book I've written and give me your honest opinion? And if you feel you can't do that, would you say so now and save us both a lot of time and anguish? And she said, sure, okay, I'll read it and I'll tell you the truth. And she did. She said it didn't work. And I said, how? And she said, well, there's not enough to it. It needs something more. And I said, like what? And she said, how should I know? You're the writer. So it took me another year to figure out what more it needed. And then I phoned her and said, okay, I've rewritten this book. Would you read it again? And she said, again? And I said, if you'll read it again, when it's a bestseller at I'm Rich and Famous, you can have 10%. And she said, I want 20. And I said, tough, you can have 10. And she still gets 10% now.
Wow.
She and my husband are my first editors.
And so is that just for the first book or for all the books to start?
All of the books.
Wow.
Yes, all of the books. They have both worked very hard on all of the books. And yes, she's done very well out of it.
Yeah. Well, you make it clear in your books, actually, in the thank yous and the introductions and so on, that your family do play a great role in research and help, because your brother is I think he's over in Ontario, is he?
I have two brothers in Ontario,
yeah,
who know the North in a way that I never will. I should say that I spent most of my time in Southern Ontario. I was born in Southern Ontario, but we have a family home that has been in the North. And that home has been there well over 100 years now. Still there. We're going there this summer. And it was there that I learned to love that landscape. It's an absolutely beautiful, iconic landscape of Canada, with the lakes and the still water and the canoes and all that sort of thing. We have a canoe here on the Thames. And so I set my books up there, but I would not let them go out to a publisher without my brothers reading them to be sure that I've got everything right. And also they are a fund of information for research. In one of the books, I needed a doctor who had been a doctor up there back in the 50s and 60s. And I asked one brother who lives up north, and he said, oh, sure, yeah, I know, Jack Bailey, only come quick, he's 86 and he's had major heart surgery. So, and then with this last book, I needed a policeman, a cop. And I phoned my brother and said, know any cops who were cops up here way, way, way back? And he said, oh, sure, yeah, neighbor of mine. So they've been wonderfully helpful, and they've been very, very good proofreaders of mistakes in the book, of which there are always plenty.
And are there characters in the book who are, I mean, obviously so many of them are formed from your imagination, but so many of them feel so real to the reader. And I know you mentioned in Crow Lake, I think it is, that, yeah, it's Crow Lake, where you talk about the image of your great grandmother, and
Yes.
she had a book attached to her, I think it was her sewing wheel, and she wasn't an educated person, but she educated herself through her voracious appetite for books. And that image stayed with you and became part of the landscape of the novel in a way.
It did. It was a bit of family lore that was kind of drummed into us to make us all value education, because, of course, when it's laid on and compulsory, you don't value it. And we were, told. My mother's father grew up on a subsistence farm, just, absolutely with nothing, but his mother had attached a bookrest to her spinning wheel so that she could read while she was spinning. And she was determined that all 4 of her children would get an education, come what may. it was the route out of poverty. I think that's true in all immigrant communities, and Canada's an immigrant country. We're all immigrants apart from the Native American people who live there. And so the three younger children did the work of the eldest in the fields while he finished high school. That was the very first member of the family to finish high school. And he was very bright and got a scholarship to university. When he graduated and got a job, he paid for his brother. He helped pay for his brother. And the two of them helped send their sister to teachers college. And the three of them helped the baby of the family, John. So all four of those children did get educated and get off the farm, which was an enormous achievement. And education was a big deal in our family. And that kind of stayed with me. I rebelled against it enormously as a kid. I could not wait to get out of that tiny little community where everybody knew your business and knew your parents. And I was just desperate to leave. And I went to...
It's a great bit, and I think it's in the new book, actually, A Town Called Solace, where Liam, the character, he goes and he meets his ex, and then somebody asks him how he's doing, and he's like, why do you people know everything? And actually, nothing to do with it, but the town is so small and enclosed that he just is convinced that it's the town of the swishing curtains and everybody sort of finding out everything. And that is like growing up in a small town. That is very much part and parcel of how people inevitably feel, because they're watching each other even without meaning to.
That's right. Everybody knows your business, has known you since the day you were born. My brother up there in northern Canada, he has taught on an island up there for more than 40 years. And he's taught everybody and everybody's parents, and in some cases grandparents. You know, he knows everyone and everyone knows him. And it's just, he was very concerned that his kids get off the island and see the world. But a lot of people don't want to leave. The North gets its hooks in. And even those who do leave frequently come back.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the latest book a little bit. And I know as well, you're very kindly agreed to read from it for us. And I should say as well, actually, if anyone has any questions that they would like to put to Mary at a later point, please do put them into the little chat box and I'll read them out towards the end. So so if you have a question, do write it down and I'll get to them towards the end. But Mary, the new novel, Booker nominated again for you, which is great. And maybe tell me a little bit about the idea to flash between very different types of characters, because we have a very young girl, we have Liam, as I was mentioning, the man who's coming into this community where he's a stranger in a strange land. And then we have Mrs. Orchard, who's in hospital and very sick. So these are radically different viewpoints. So why these three?
Again, nothing was planned. I write from a character. I get an idea for a character, and then I try and figure out what their story is. And everything grows from there. If I could read you a short passage from the beginning of the book, it's kind of an illustration of how it happened. The first image, the first hint of an idea for the book came 2 years after I'd finished Road Ends, and I was getting pretty desperate. I didn't have any idea what to write about. And then I got a picture in my head of a man carrying big boxes, 4 big boxes into a house. And in the house next door, a little girl is watching him. So I wrote it down. And I can't say why I wrote it from the little girl's viewpoint. I just did. There were 4 boxes, big ones. They must have lots of things in them because they were heavy. You could tell by the way the man walked when he carried them in, stooped over, knees bent. He brought them right into the house next door to Clara's that first evening and put them on the floor in the living room and just left them there. That meant the boxes didn't have necessary things in them, things he needed straight away, like pajamas, or he'd have unpacked them. The boxes were in the middle of the floor, which made Clara fidgety. Every time the man came into the living room, he had to walk round them. If he put them against a wall, he wouldn't have had to do that, and it would have looked much neater. And why would he bring them in from his car and then not unpack them? And I thought, yes, why? What's the story here? What's Clara's story? And it was 2 weeks before I had any idea whatsoever. I just had that one image. And then I was watching the news one night, and there were a mother and father with some policemen appealing for information because one of their children had gone missing. Just one of these desperate appeals for help. And I noticed that they did not have any other children with them. And I thought, well, that's quite right. You don't want to expose children to the media, particularly at a time like that, but hopefully ever. And that made me think, but wow, it must be hell for siblings of a child who goes missing, particularly if they're too young to understand what's happening. And if their parents, in their attempt to protect them, try to pretend everything's all right and reassure them and say, everything's fine. It'll just, things we find, we just have to wait a little bit and get some news. A child very, very young indeed can pick up when everything isn't fine. They can see that. And it just adds bewilderment and fear to grief. And I thought, okay, that's the story for Clara. Her adored big sister, Rose, has a flaming row with their mom and storms out saying, you will never see me again. And then does not come back. And there's a police search and all those things. So I got that far in my head and got stuck and thought, I guess I need another character. How about the guy? And I decided that he was a stranger from the south, didn't know the north at all, that he was mid-30s and in crisis of some sort. And I decided the sort was A, he had just split from his wife. B, he had just walked out of his job and he did not have the faintest idea of what came next. And he was in a very bad state. And I thought, okay, so why is that? And what's at the bottom of it all? And why is he coming into this strange house? Well, who owns it? An old woman. Write about what you know. Elizabeth Orchard is 72. And I was younger than that when I started to write the book. I'm considerably older now. But I thought, okay, she's in hospital, she's ill, and she's coming to the end of her life. And somehow or other, she is linked with this man. But if she's ill and she's 72 and she's linked to him, she probably knew him when he was a child. And I thought, right, okay, so here's her story. She was a kindergarten teacher. but could not have children of her own. She had 5 miscarriages and was in a really terrible state. If she's 72 now, and I know the book is set about then, because I don't write about Canada long after I left it, because I wouldn't know what it had been like. Then she was born in 1900, and she will have been trying to conceive for years, and now it's 1940. Time is really running out for her. She has had 5 miscarriages. The war is on. She will not have spoken to anyone about the miscarriages. That was women's things, and you didn't talk about them. And there was very little help for people, and GPs knew very little about postnatal depression. There probably wasn't even such a term at that stage. And she was very isolated and became very depressed. And then I decided a family moves in next door with children, which just about kills her. 3 children, one of them a very small boy, 3 years old, whose name is Liam. So the story about her relationship with Liam becomes the 3rd strand of this book. And we learn about Liam's background, which is very, very unhappy, which leads to his present troubles. Basically, he had a very traumatic childhood. And the interesting question, which I discussed a lot with my sister, who is a clinical psychologist, was how much will childhood trauma affect him in adulthood? And that was, to me, the most interesting strand of the book, was figuring out how damaged he would be and what was possible for him at this stage in his life.
Because you see him through the book actively lamenting what other people say to him, that he can't form close bonds, that he struggles to have friendships, and that his ex accuses him of being unfeeling, and that there's a barrier between him and other people, and he's able to sense it within himself, but not necessarily jump over it. And it's one of the really interesting things about his move from the big city to this small rural community, that he looks around and there's nowhere to go for food except the hot potato and this terrible restaurant. There's nothing for him to do. He's in this house that he has been given, and his life has come to sort of an abrupt stop in so many ways.
Yes.
Yet through the end of a previous life for him, through the ending of his relationship, the leaving behind of his job, all the embers of that, they're the seedlings of another type of life that starts to form. And I think anyone who's been in a small community can also understand that the difference of values between a small community and a large community can be very, very helpful to people, these loose bonds. And it was something that I thought actually during the pandemic, we didn't see an awful lot of our friends and family and the people that we were most used to spending so much time with. For various reasons, we couldn't get on flights, we couldn't go to meet them, but we did talk to the postman, and we talked to our neighbors more.
Yes.
And those loose bonds became very important. So I think the book explores that a little bit, all without having anything to do with the pandemic, obviously, being a historical novel, but still taps into that world.
I thought when the pandemic happened, the book was already finished, but I thought, wow, that is amazing, because we got to know, we formed a community within our street. That community had not been there before, if you like. We were just separate people, and now we're like a village within a street, because we all had to look out for each other, and because we were the only people we saw. And like you say, the postman, anyone that you come in contact with is important to you. And actually, That's very true in small communities. You don't, I can remember after Crow Lake came out, somebody said to me, why were the social services not involved with those children? And I said, what social services? Where were the nearest social services? A couple of 100 miles away, you know. You look out for each other because there isn't anybody else, basically. And the flip side of that is everybody knows everybody. And they won't let Liam live in his shell. The first thing that happens to the poor man in his state of crisis is that kind of within 24 hours of moving in, he gets a visit from the police. I thought he will get a visit from the police because he has just moved in next door to a family whose child has gone missing. And there's another child in that family, potentially vulnerable. Who is this stranger? Isn't it a coincidence that he has arrived and moved in here? So he gets a very interested cop on his doorstep saying, who are you? Why are you here? Basically. I phoned my brother, said, I need a cop. I need to know exactly what would go on. So I got all the gen on the cop. But that starts, and then he needs a builder, Liam does, because he needs to do some repairs to the house. And the builder just won't stop talking to him. And then an absolutely key moment in the book is when he meets Clara. I knew that was going to, obviously that's going to come. This guy is going to meet the child next door. And as it happens, that was more inevitable because Mrs. Orchard, who is in hospital and who owns the house that Liam is in, has a cat. And she has asked Clara to look after the cat while she's in hospital. And Clara's mother is allergic to cats. So Clara looks after the cat in Mrs. Orchard's house. And when this stranger comes, she's very alarmed and upset. And she keeps sneaking in to feed the cat. And clearly, obviously, she's going to get caught. And I thought, what is that relationship? What's that first meeting going to be like? Is he going to be aggressive towards her? He is pushing hard against people trying to connect with him because he can't do it. He doesn't know how, and he doesn't want to. He just wants to keep to himself. And here's this kid standing in his living room. Is he going to be aggressive? Is he going to say, what the hell are you doing here? What's he going to say? And then I realized what he says is going to reflect who he really is underneath all the trauma that he suffered. The nature part, the nurture we know was bad. What was his nature? Because that's going to determine what he says. And not only did it determine what he said, from that point on, his role in the book changes dramatically. And he is forced to play a very important role.
It's interesting to me how you describe, even as you're talking, the process of finding your character's motivations and journeys. It's obvious that you are actively thinking while you're writing, and some authors don't do that. Some authors have a chart and structure before they start, and they've like, character A is going to get to character, to this point, and then this is going to happen, and it's extremely plotted out. Whereas the impression you give is very far from that you're with your characters the whole way, and that perhaps the character might make a decision that you as author would rather they didn't, but you still feel like, no, that's the journey, that's the point.
Absolutely. You're spot on. the story evolves. I mean, people say, do you know the end before you start? I don't know the next sentence before I start. And the next sentence triggers the next one and the next one. And that's what drives the plot. It's, in particular, it's characters interacting with each other. One of the other books, The Other Side of the Bridge, started with just a central character, a young farm boy, a very quiet, heavy, solid character. And I thought, okay, so who is he? And I thought, give him a brother. Let's see how they interact. So I gave him a younger brother, Jake. And I had them play a game. I had Jake hound Arthur and into playing a game that my brothers used to play called Knives, where you throw knives at each other's feet. And in the course of them playing that game, I realized who Arthur was, who Jake was, and the fact that the story was going to hinge around the relationship between those two boys. And I knew that one way or another it would end bloody, as they say, but I didn't know how. And I didn't know what happened in between. But it all just evolved from their conversation while they played this ridiculous game.
It strikes me, though, that what you were doing as an author has the capacity to be exhausting, in that there are other authors who probably give themselves an easier time of it.
It is an absolutely crazy way to work, and I do not recommend it, and I wouldn't do it if I could do it any other way. I have tried to plot. I've tried having timelines. I've tried all this stuff. Okay, be logical, be rational about this. I've come to the conclusion that I don't actually write with my brain. I write with my guts. And afterwards, I switch on my brain and go back and try and make sense. I am continually rewriting because I get myself into positions where, I think, hang on, this can't happen then. The timing's all wrong. And I have to go back. And it takes me 6 years to write a not very long book, which is why at the age of 76, I've only written 4 books. It's just a long and agonizing and ridiculous process. But on the other hand, it is interesting. It is entirely character driven, and characters what I'm interested in, and watching the characters develop and grow and change is, I find, very interesting. The hope is that so will the reader.
Well, speaking of readers, I want to bring in some questions from our audience at this point. So if you have a question now would be a good time to jot down into the little chat box, and I'll read it out. Groyna Murphy was in touch, and Groyna, you're saying, I love how Mary talks about her characters. They're so real to her, and that comes across so beautifully in her books. Does she carry characters with her, even if they are not part of a story she is working on?
The characters that I have written about are all with me. I do spend an enormous amount of time with them as I'm writing them. 6 years, as I say. I spend more time with them than I do with my kids, and I know them very, very well, and they don't leave me. None of them have left me. They're all with me. And even the minor characters, I enjoy having them in the background with me. Some of them play quite a small role. Jim Peake in this book, I became very fond of Jim Peake. He's an idiot and he never shuts up, and he drives Liam completely crazy, but he is part of Liam's salvation, if you like.
And it's a good balance because he's humorous, and there is a strand of humor going through the book as well, which is very important because there's some really dark themes going through the novel, and you know when to get in and when to get out of that, because there's only so much a reader can process maybe at one point.
You're right. Boy, do you get it. It's the humor is in there because I wouldn't want to move on if it weren't, because the themes are dark and you need to lighten things up. I love having kids in books because kids are funny, unintentionally funny, and that helps lift things too. And you need, plus, I mean, even Liam has a good sense of humor, and it lifts some of the scenes, which are otherwise, could be depressing.
Yeah. And why did you not write from Rose's perspective was one thing I wondered about, because when the book starts, like Clara's sister has gone missing, and most of the time you're told to go to the point of drama,
Yes.
And there's a clear point of drama there.
Yes.
Where is she? Has she been abducted? Is she okay? Is she living the high life somewhere? What's going on? But you choose to keep that in the shadows,
yeah,
in favor of focusing the narrative on these three very different characters. And I think that's a really interesting choice. So I wondered, did you actually write any drafts where she was in a different way?
No, because from the beginning, from when I watched that couple on television and started thinking about the siblings, this was the siblings' story, not Rose's story. I didn't know until I was within a few pages of the end whether Rose was alive or not. It seemed very likely from talking to the cop that she would not be. He said she'll have gone to Toronto. They all go to Toronto. The only place they've heard of for a start. And they think there'll be lots of other kids and they'll have, a good time on the street and it'll be wonderful. And it's so dangerous. And I thought, okay, I don't know if she lives or dies. I'll have to wait and see how that develops. So I never do go into her story in the same way. Well, no, I can't go on that theme or I'll give it away. But no, I decided this wasn't her story. It's in the other side of the bridge, there is a woman at the heart of it, Laura, who is seen from the viewpoint of two men. And people said, why didn't you write Laura's story? Well, it's not about her. It's about how she's perceived by two men.
Yeah. And can I ask, you're so acclaimed. You have fans, as I was mentioning at the beginning, across the globe, and amazing writers love your work. Anne Tyler and wonderful people have written wonderful compliments about you, which must be very gratifying. But when you release a new novel, do you still get nervous about its reception? Can you feel assured of its success at this point?
Oh, absolutely not. I am perfectly capable of writing a bad book. I have done so. My first book was rubbish. I shredded it. I know. I have no idea how it's going to work out. I am fortunate in having both my husband and sister on board now who are honest. And it doesn't go anywhere without them being happy with it. But even so, I don't know how it's going to go. And some books are more successful than others. And also, I'm constantly surprised because of my age. There are so many younger writers coming up, and I think people are just going to get tired of old writers. So no, I am always anxious about it. And also because, as I said earlier, I write what I want to write. If I were writing what I thought people wanted to read, then maybe there would be more chance that they would. But that's not the position, fortunately for me, that I've been in. I've managed to write things people seem to want to read.
And our time is drawing to a close, and I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned at the beginning that you didn't actually need to write for financial reasons. You were fortunate in that your husband, you were a mother, your husband was able to work and provide.
Yeah.
So what is the inner ambition that drives you? Is it to write the very best book ever? Is it to understand your characters perfectly? Is it to answer some questions that you didn't even know you had before you sat down at the page? What gets you back every morning, Monday to Friday, working on a novel?
It's the characters, and it is the high that you get from writing when it works. Like, mostly for me, it doesn't. And I have to go back and do it again and again and again and again. The delete button is the one I use most. But I love it when it's working. And I love it when the characters, I find it very interesting. It's like reading a book that you're really enjoying with characters that you really care about. You want to know what is going to happen to them at the end. You want to be realistic about it. You want people to believe you, but you really want to interest people. And I wanted to know what was going to happen to those three characters. I did not know what would happen to Liam. And I was surprised by what happened to Liam. I have to say, that was not what I had in mind. But the story dictated that. So,
well, the book is wonderful. It's the latest book, A Town Called Solace. And of course, there is the 3-strong back catalogue as well, which, if you haven't checked out, you should absolutely go to those small bookshops and get them. Mary Lawson, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you this morning on behalf of the West Cork Literary Festival. Like I said at the beginning, I'm sorry both of us can't be there in person, but hopefully you'll get down to West Cork yourself one of these days soon. And I know I'll be back very soon.
Yes, Nadine, thank you. This has been such a pleasure. And I do wish it could have been in person. And another time, hopefully it will be. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to Emer as well.
Yes, thank you, Emer.
And huge thanks to both of you, to Mary Lawson and to Nadine O'Regan for joining us today, and our audience for tuning in. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as we did. That was just such a fascinating conversation. Do keep an eye on our website, and hopefully we'll see you all here later in the week. And Mary and Nadine, absolute pleasure to see you in Bantry another year. So thank you both for giving your time, and I wish you a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.